In the late classical period of Indian history, the genre of the Shastra emerged, which means something like study or manual in a general sense. An easy way to think of a Shastra is like the English suffix ology, such as biology or geology. One subgenre of this tradition is the Dharma Shastra, which is guides written with regards to one's dharma or duties. They variously cover the responsibilities and ethics to oneself, to family, and as members of a society. Amongst these texts, perhaps the most famous, or infamous depending on one's position on the issue, is the Book of Manu, also known as Manusmriti. Named after the legendary author, Manu, the progenitor of all humanity, the text reached its final redaction sometime between the 3rd century BCE and the 2nd century CE. The Manusmriti prescribes to Hindus their dharma, that is, their obligations incumbent upon them as a member of one of the 4 social classes, or Varnas, and engaged in one of the 4 stages of life, or Ashrama. The concept of Varna can be traced to much earlier in Indic thought, including the myth of Purusha in the Vedas. This divides Indian society into 4 groups, or Varnas, being Brahmin, priests, Kshatriya, warriors, Vaishya, merchants, and Shudra, who are peasants or farmers. It should be noted that Varna is subtly different to the Western understanding of caste, which is more accurately accords with the Indian concept of jati. This is a specific geographic, vocational, linguistic, religious, and ethnic category which varies throughout India's different regions and comes in thousands of varieties. Defenders of Manusmriti have also stated that the book is not an inflexible rule that condemns people to their Varna, but rather promotes Varna based on an individual's merits, something that Indian reformers and foreign critics would reject as too generous a reading. The Manusmriti describes in detail how each of these Varna should live their lives, although paying much more attention to the lives of Brahmin than the other Varna. For most Varna, excluding Shudra, life is divided into 4 stages, or Ashrama. The first stage for Brahmins, Kshatriya, and Vaishya is called the Brahmacharya. This is the student life which begins with the child as soon as they are accepted to study under a guru or teacher in a ritual called the Upanayana. As part of this ceremony, the child becomes a Dvaja, or twice-born. Male initiates are given a sacred thread, a loop worn next to the skin over the left shoulder and across the right hip, marking this new status. During this period, the student specifically studies the Vedas. In traditional Indian society, Shudra or Dalit communities were excluded from hearing, let alone studying Vedic hymns. Similarly, in such classical Indian society, women of all Varna categories were excluded from studying the Vedas in an official context. However, since the 19th century, Indian society has challenged these norms. Whilst undergoing this ashrama, students are meant to remain celibate and focus on the study under their guru. The Brahmacharya period should theoretically start when the child is about 5 to 8 years old and lasts until about the age of 14 to 20 years. However, in practice, it can be much shorter, a matter of days or even just the memorization of a single line in the Vedas. However, as theology goes, if the Vedas are complete and revealed truth, even a section of them contains the totality of that truth, and as such, even though the lengthy religious study was recommended, it is rarely practiced. The next phase of life is the Grihastha, or householder stage. This was open not only to the upper Varna, but also to Shudra and women as well. It is marked by the wedding ceremony and signals the end of chastity and entry into the most productive phase of a person's life. This phase accords with the most intense physical, sexual, and emotional experiences of one life, where an individual is expected to commit fully to their duties as a member of the broader society. This includes the maintenance of a household, the establishment and raising of a family, and the production of food and wealth which sustains the community. The third stage of life was that of retirement, Vanaprastha. Once an individual has seen out their most productive days, they should relinquish power and control to the next generation and then take on an advisory role. At this stage, the individual is recommended to give up the pursuit of wealth and pleasure, which belong to the householders, and instead focus on moksha, the attainment of spiritual liberation. The most dedicated and devout would then progress to the final stage of the ashrama process, sannyasa, or renunciation. They would give up all worldly possessions, their families, and pursue an ascetic life in the wilderness. To become a sadhu or a sadhvi, a male or female hermit recluse, reflected a practice common to the religious traditions of India, be they Jain, Buddhist, or Hindu. However, it should be noted that this stage of life could be compared to the similar Hermetic Cynic traditions of the ancient Mediterranean tradition and the monk and nun ideals of the later Christian world. So what are the virtues that Manusmriti encourages? Depending on the stage of life, this includes diligence, productiveness, spirituality, and non-attachment. However, throughout the text, the work continues to encourage and urge the reader to avoid violence. This includes an encouragement to abstain from the eating of meat. The text has been criticized by proponents of women's rights, both within and without India, as limiting the ability of women to partake in formal Vedic education. However, women, and Shudras for that matter, can still partake in the other three stages of Ashrama. Furthermore, the text is rather one-sided in regards to giving power and property to men over women, in particular with regards to the issues of marriage and the demanding of chastity for women who are already widowed. However, it should be noted the text also gives some rights to women to dissolve abusive marriages and secures to them some property rights, although not on an equal footing with men. The Manusmriti was an important text throughout medieval times, otherwise it wouldn't have survived to today, but it existed in a much broader subgenre of Dharma-Shastra texts, which allowed Indian Hindus to live in a variety of lifestyles and still be seen as part of the same Hindu group of religious traditions. Once again, I should remind you that when I use the term Hindu, it's rather anachronistically because the term isn't used by Indians until colonial rule. The Manusmriti acquires its dominant position in the Dharma-Shastra genre during British colonial rule. At the time, the British colonial government wanted to find a cultural and religious law code which they could enact as part of their rule over the Indian subcontinent. For Muslims, they could use Sharia, but facing the multifaceted and plural Hindu tradition, they were at a loss. The Manusmriti, thus instituted as a code of law for Indian Hindus, provided a single point of reference for the colonial administration. Since this point, it has remained an important and influential text, although competing with reformist traditions that also exist in India. Manusmriti remains a contentious subject in Indian politics to this day. The Hindu Nationalist Party, BJP, is sometimes described as the party of Manu by detractors who want to paint it as harkening back to a somewhat medieval conception of religious law. Others have attempted to reinterpret the text as a treatise on moral life rather than a hard and fast law code. Regardless, Manusmriti has remained a topic of debate and disagreement into the 21st century.